Hey, Gateway, this is Pastor Jason Crabtree. Thank you for joining us tonight at Gateway Midweek. Usually we do this in person, but tonight, because we have a couple more people than normal and just some different things that are going on in all of our worlds, we decided it would be the best for us to meet through Zoom. And so we're here to do that. Why don't you guys quickly go around? We'll start with Bill. Bill, share who you are, how you're connected to Gateway, and maybe what you used to do in the community.
Well, good evening, Gateway. I'm Bill Yoshimoto. I've been at Gateway, my wife and myself. We've been here about 25 years. I used to be a district attorney. I did that for 31 years. I was pastor of discipleship at Gateway for 5 years. And the last 3-4 years, I am fully retired and loving being retired. So I'm just Bill these days.
Cool. How about you guys?
Oh, well, good evening. My name is Seth Reed, and this is my wife, Lindsay. And we have been attending Gateway for about 3 years now, since I took a new position with Southern California Edison and moved from the Midwest back to California. And yeah. Anything?
Yeah. No, we belong to a small group, and we just love Gateway.
Great. So all of you volunteer in some way, shape, or form at Gateway. So I'm sure many of the people, hopefully, that are watching this, they say, hey, those people look familiar at some point, you know. And so man, we appreciate having you on tonight. So, you know, we've been going through Gateway like the last few weeks. We've talked about invite, connect, develop, and serve. Last week, Josh Miller and I, we talked about spiritual freedom and you know, how that starts with surrender. And so I'd encourage you, trust me, you've got time. Go back and watch those if you haven't already and dive into that, because it's really who Gateway is and part of our culture and DNA. And so, especially if you're new to the church or if you've been around so long that you have forgotten what Gateway is about, it's good to go back and to watch those things. So I'm excited for tonight's topic, which is discipleship. And all of us here in this Zoom meeting, we share a deep passion for discipleship. We've had a lot of conversation, you know, over the years and especially over the last couple of years. And so I briefly wanted to kind of share a little bit, some thoughts about discipleship before we jump in, kind of share what my working definition of discipleship is. That way, whenever we mention discipleship moving forward, you know exactly kind of what we're talking about. And so, you know, to be a disciple of Christ is to be one that follows Jesus and lives it out, lives out the teachings of Christ. The purpose of discipleship is to shape believers into a committed, to be committed followers of Christ, committed followers of Christ. In Matthew 16:24, Jesus says to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. You know, Christ calls us also as believers to go and to make disciples. And that's, the Bible is clear, that's for everybody. If you're a believer of Christ and you're a follower of Christ and you put your faith and trust in him, you are called to be a disciple maker. And so, and that's kind of more what we are going to be talking about tonight. My working definition of and this could change, but I've spent a lot of time in prayer over this. It is the personal and relational, which I believe that just right there, the personal and relational, that is connected to, you know, the great calling that Christ has us on. In Matthew 28:18-20, it said, Jesus came and told his disciples, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you even to the end of the age. So there's a personal and a relational. It is a lifelong process of helping other believers grow in more and more maturity in their faith and their relationship with God and others, and in turn recreating that process with others. So it's disciples becoming disciples of Christ, and then making disciples and recreating that process. So when we talk about discipleship, that's what we're talking about, is that the personal and relational growth of growing in your faith, and helping those around you, specifically, 1 to 2 to 3 people, specifically in relationship with them. And we'll talk more about what that looks like, and helping them mature in their relationship with Christ and to be able to recreate the process. And so I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that. That was a mouthful. But yeah, any thoughts on that?
Well, I would just want to kind of clarify even the difference between mentorship versus discipleship. Where mentorship is usually mentee led, you find a mentor, and discipleship, which I know Bill will get into, is discipler led, where the discipler comes to you. So just to kind of clarify maybe those two terms a little bit so they're not confused while we're talking about discipleship.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Any other thoughts before?
Yeah, and I think when we think about discipleship, it's a lifelong journey, as you say, Jason. And it's, in a sense, it's a never-ending road. You're always improving. You're always getting better. You're always getting closer and more intimate with Jesus. But it's a lifelong journey that's just continues on.
For sure, for sure. So as we have been talking over the last couple of weeks, we met last week, the four of us, and we talked about, okay, what is this time going to look like? And as we kind of unpack that a little bit, Bill came up. He was talking about, hey, I have some of these thoughts. So I came up with two big questions, two big ideas that I want us to look at tonight. And that is, what were some of the things Christ did while discipling the 12 disciples? So what were things that Christ did? And then the other question is, how did the 12 respond to being discipled, right? So what was their relationship as Christ empowered them to go and make other disciples? And so as we were kind of unpacking these two questions, Bill says, hey, I've kind of looked at this and had some ideas, and I came up with 5 words for each, and they all start with the letter I. And so I thought, this is ingenious. And so Bill, we're going to ask you to share those, and we're going to kind of dive in to some of those, because this is a lot to process. And let me say this too, before Bill jumps in. We are going to unpack discipleship in this Gateway Midweek over the weeks to come. And so this is something that we're going to continue to hit and come back to, because we really believe it is the foundation of the gospel. It is the foundation for us as a church. And if we want to be effective in the community, I think the first thing we do is we got to say, what is God calling us to do? And that's very clear. And that is to be a disciple and to make disciples. So Bill, why don't you jump in and answer that first question with those 5 words.
Okay. You hit it right on the head, Jason, when you said that discipleship with Jesus was personal and relational. And so out of that, I feel that Jesus was invitational. He invited people. He invited those disciples to come and join him. And he was very intentional about what he did. So that intentionality was huge, I think. And then not only was it intentional, he made it very interactive. And so this whole process of growing and learning about walking with Jesus was a very interactive experience. And it was also a very intimate experience. Jesus talked to hundreds and thousands perhaps, but he really, really got down with just the 12 or the handful of men and women who surrounded him. So he was very intimate in that relationship. And then he brought with him a very intense experience of life. It wasn't something standoff or arm's length. It was intense because it was right in their faces. So it was invitational. He was intentional. He was interactive. He was very intimate, and it was intense. So those are the 5 I's that I've been thinking through.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So Bill, of those 5, which one maybe, as you're looking at them, kind of jump out at you as really making an impact on you that Christ did?
The first thing I think was that it was interactive. They're all important. All the I's are important to me, but that interactive really means that he brought people alongside of him, and he got right alongside of people, and he mixed it up with these guys. It wasn't something he just wrote and said, read this. No, he mixed it up together. So there's that interactiveness that I think is so important in discipleship.
Yeah, one of the things that sticks out to me actually is intentionality. Like, I come and follow me. That's what Christ says to the disciples when he's calling them from their fishing. I want you to come follow me and be my disciple. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think sometimes with the relationships we have with others, you can't just, some of the relationships happen organically and some take work and a lot of effort. And you intentionally have to reach out to some of those people to disciple them or to make those meaningful, lasting relationships where you're spurring them to know more, grow deeper in their faith. And I that's the eye that really stood out to me, was the intentional one.
Mhm. Yeah, I would say that was, for me, that too stood out, the intentionality. But I think for me, it stands out because, I in the past, in other relationships, when things have gone south, right, or relationships that have broken down over the years, or rough relationships, it causes me to be more cautious, right? So it's like I purposefully almost am not intentional in certain relationships. And so, like you said, but then I started thinking maybe that falls into the intimate category, is I don't know if I just want to be open in those relationships. So
that's exactly the one that stood out to me, is that intimacy component, because for me, that also requires a lot of growth on my end, right? When you're intimate with someone, you're learning to be patient. You're learning how they're thinking and how they're working. And it's not at my pace. It's not the way that my brain works all the time. And it's just like a marriage, right? Like when you're bringing two different people together. And so it can be, for me, it's a very challenging experience.
yeah,
So.
that's great. I know we all say hi to Judy real quick. We saw her jump in real quick on the screen.
Sorry, I didn't know you guys were recording.
Yeah,
it's all
well,
good.
this is live. It's what happens when you're live.
I love it.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, maybe let's talk a little bit more about the intentionality, because I think that is so important.
Yeah.
Especially in the time we're in right now, is that you just can't hang out with everybody,
Right.
and you can't, and so your circle gets smaller. And so if you are going to hang out, like I know for me, in the last probably month, there's been a handful of people that I feel like have really wanted to connect. And so on top of just all these other things, you talk about being intimate, you talk about intentionality, like I've got to worry about, hey, who has this person been around? I don't want to get sick, right? And so that's something in the back of my head, or maybe even more just at the forefront. And so even more intentionality, I think it takes on a whole new meaning of, if I'm gonna be around this person and be in a discipleship, type of relationship. There's a big trust there that comes, with that, but being intentional, and so I don't know, you guys have thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, when we talk about intentionality, it's both ways. Jesus, his whole being, what he was doing, he was very intentional about his life here on earth and his interactions with us. But as a disciple, someone who's going to follow Jesus, we have to intend to do that too. It just doesn't happen by chance. You don't fall into this. You've got to choose the life with Jesus. So you have to have that intentionality too, if you're going to go down that journey and want to grow and progress.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and I think for us, children, taking the time to just be really intentional with our kids during this time has been, because we can choose what we teach them about the relationship with God. That's our job. And that has been something that, especially during this time, is, I don't know, I feel like it's really blossomed more. We've been able to be more intentional because they're sitting in church service with us, right? So we can explain concepts. We can explain why we're praying the way we pray, what the what communion means, all these different things that we normally wouldn't be able to do. So that's been a really neat thing, just to put a little bit of a different spin on intentionality.
Yeah.
Within your own home.
Yeah. And even in that, I know, I mean, your kids are younger. My kids are a little bit older. And so we have one that's getting ready to go away to school in like a month. And so they're looking at life in a different spectrum, right? Like they're looking at life differently. And so as ready to get out of Visalia and start, this kind of second stage. Now my son, he's it's been really interesting, just the conversations that we've had. And like you said, we have a lot of conversations about these riots that are going on, about the different things in politics, and so we've had some really, really good conversation. And like you said, part of my responsibility as a dad is to go, okay, where's Christ at in all of this? Where's and make sure that enters in the conversation of, you may think this way, I may think this way, but this is why I think this way. And so, because in a sense, my son will be 16 in November, he's got to think for himself. His faith is now his own. But there is that sense of discipleship happening within that relationship of being able to, and I think this gets into that, that interactive, like you're talking about, Bill, is just an everyday life interaction of being able to model a Christ response. And I fail at that all the time. I have learned to say I'm sorry so many times over these last 3 months. Yeah. And so anyway, but I think that's a great point. It is a really, really good point. Any other thoughts on that?
You both have mentioned children. Obviously Seth and Lindsay, you're at a different stage than where Jason is. And, I'm at the stage where my kids are adults, they're older than you guys, and I have grandchildren. And so as I deal with my grandchildren, I'm starting to see the things that I should have done better with my own children. And now I can purpose to do that into their lives. And so there's a whole level of intentionality that I have now that I wish I had. And so maybe that's part of the joy or the onus of getting older. You have these life experiences that hopefully you've learned from. And as a person who's in a discipling situation, if you're with someone who's just a little bit further ahead, you get the benefit of that. You get the benefit of that intentionality.
Yeah.
Well, I think your children, they want to emulate you. So what are you actually showing them? And so I know one of the things for me, like I struggle with technology. I always want to just, if I have free time, I'm probably like messing with my phone. And, when my kids wake up and I've been up for a while working, it's one of those things where it's like, shoot, should I always just be connected to my phone? What are my children going to do? Are they going to emulate that? Or should I have my Bible out? Should I be in the midst of a quiet time when they woke up? Because that's one of the things, growing up as a kid, my mom, every morning when I woke up for school at like 5:30, she was finishing up her quiet time. So every morning I woke up and there she is reading her Bible, doing her Bible study, doing some Beth Moore, doing something. And so that's just what I assumed was normal. And so, wanting to emulate that or be an example, it takes a lot of intentionality by the discipler to think about those things like, okay, when my kids wake up, what am I going to be showing them? What is it that my kids will emulate? Because they're probably just going to do what I did. If that's the natural thing that they saw their parents do. So it is something that it's a work in progress because it's a real struggle. Like I just always go to my phone to fill in time or if I'm bored. And I should be going to prayer, to the word, and be doing the things that have, heavenly value versus really no value at a lot of the, social media or whatever else I'm getting distracted with. ESPN, yeah. Because there's so much sports going on right now.
Hey, stop meddling, Lindsay. ESPN's good.
I still got to look up stuff on the Dodgers because they are going to be playing at some point, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. Well, I mean, like you said, Bill, I mean, it's a lifelong process.
Yes.
It is a lifelong process. And I also wanted to mention this too. I started thinking about it. At the heart of this is we want to see people come into relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what the main, I think, push behind discipleship is like I read, in Matthew 28, go and make disciples and baptize them. Like, so that's clear. Like the first step is like, lead somebody to Christ, show them, and we'll get into that over the weeks to come.
Yeah.
Because, some of you may, as soon as I said that, go, no. Our church, we bring them to church and Pastor Ed says a prayer and that's how they accept Christ. And yeah, that we do provide that every week. We provide an opportunity for people to accept Christ. But, as part of this Gateway midweek, as part of just Gateway in general, with the invite and connect, especially that invite others into relationship with Christ. Like we're going to show you ways over the weeks to come to do that. Because what happens when your kids come to you and say, hey, I want to accept Christ. Like I want to ask Jesus into my heart, or whatever thing they say in their innocence. What happens when your neighbor comes and goes, look, I'm lost and I need some hope here. Right. And we want to give you tangible things to say that are biblical things that you can literally go, hey, let's talk about what this means. This is what it means to have salvation. This is what it means to have eternal life. And let's pray, right? And so we want to put those resources in your hands, because that's really a first step, I think, in discipleship is that process. And that's why you said, Seth, these things are so important, because our kids are going to emulate, right? They're going to model what we model.
Absolutely.
And like you said, Bill, being able to look back and go, man, I should have done more. I should have done this, but it's not over, right? It's not over. You are still going through life. And so, cool. Any kind of final thoughts before we jump to the second big idea? Nope. All right. Well, great. So let's real quick. I mean, invitational, intentional, interactive, intimate, and intense. So those are those 5 I's. So if you can't remember those, go back and watch this later, and you can write them down. So that second question, the big idea is, how did the 12 respond? How did those that were there with Jesus, and so it's really, how did they respond in their relationship with Christ, in personally, but also what was their response after Jesus, ascends into heaven, and they're kind of left to kind of start the church. What is their response as they begin to basically go and do Matthew 28, right? To actually put it, boots on the ground. Here we go. It's time to, Christ has empowered us to go and to bring forth the gospel. And so Bill's got another great 5 words that all start with the letter I that we're going to look at. So go ahead, Bill.
Okay. Yeah, as Jesus calls these guys out and they get connected together, at first, these men and women, they got very interested in who Jesus was and what he was saying. And once they got alongside of Jesus, they became inspired. They were inspired by Jesus. And then that inspiration turned into involvement. They got right down and dirty with Jesus and doing the ministry. They were involved. They saw what was going on. They participated in what was going on. And then as they continued to learn and see and absorb what Jesus was talking about, they integrated that into their lives, into their daily walk. They integrated those things. And then finally, they came to that point after they went through all these steps, they totally identified with Jesus. And so once Jesus was gone, once Jesus had moved on, back to heaven and sent them out for the mission, they were totally identified with who Jesus was, is, and what Jesus meant in their lives. They were identified.
So which of those, Bill, stand out to you as you look through those?
I like the integration. I like the fact that they what they saw, they totally absorbed into their lives and walked daily with that in their lives. And so I think we as believers, you've often heard that maybe the only Bible that someone's going to read is your life. And if my life isn't showing it, if it's not integrated into my life, well, what good is it?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Well, and integrated also stood out to me, and I'm reading through 2 Corinthians and Acts right now, and it's just Paul's zeal and just this endurance through his sufferings, and how did that happen? It's this integration component, right? Like he knows, he's so grateful for the gift of grace, and he is living Jesus's teachings, and he experienced Jesus. And I think when we have that personal experience, then we can't help but integrate it into our lives. It's just this natural thing that happens because we're so drawn to that freedom and so drawn to his way of life.
Yeah, and I think for me, actually, I would say it's actually being involved. Like, I want to be a part of something. I want to serve. I want to do something, not because I have to, but because I want to. Like, I want to be, I want to serve at Awanas. I want to be involved with little kids and helping spur them on to want to follow Jesus. I want to do those things even just for my kids to see, hey, look, I volunteer. I like it. It's fun for me because I want you and I want your friends to learn more about Jesus and want to know him at a deeper level. So for me, it's involvement.
Yeah. Yeah. When I thought about involved, it reminded me of an analogy about moving from being a spectator to a participator. And I think a lot about football when you've got, 24 people on the field and you've got 50, 60,000 in the stands. You've got, 24 guys that need a break and 50,000 that need exercise. so like, how do you move from like being a spectator to a participator?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, within the church, it is so easy to get in the routine of a spectator, is to come, especially even now. I mean, with the fact of everything we're doing is just watching. We're watching this. And so, so how do we, get involved? What do we do? I mean, that goes back to intentionality, being intentional about that. But I love what you said, Seth, about, because of what God is doing in your life, he's created this spirit in you where you go, I want to do these things out of a relationship and not of obligation. Although I do think sometimes obligation is good. I think in some ways, for some people, maybe you do feel like you need to be obligated. I'm often reminded of a good friend that adopted a little boy from China. And he said for years, I would tell him every night, I love you. And he would never respond back. He would just say, thank you. And so I had to tell him, it's okay to say, I love you out of obligation at this point, because eventually you're going to understand what it means and it's going to become real. And so I, so it's just interesting, but I love that aspect of like you said, Seth, what God is doing, serving and being involved, it just comes out of that spirit of where I want to do these things because of what Christ has done for me. So I think that's huge. That's huge.
Well, I think there is something to about obligation in a sense, you say, Jason.
Yeah.
Because it's like in any endeavor, whatever you want to do, you've got to put in the time and the effort to learn and practice and to be disciplined about it. And, the sports analogy is especially fitting. These guys aren't pro athletes just because they're just naturally gifted. They're at that level because they really put in the time. And they may not want to practice. They may not want to do all the drills, but they know that it's part of the process. And eventually it turns into joy for them, that it just come naturally. It looks so natural from our side of the viewpoint, but it's because they did something out of discipline, out of obligation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think we'll go through seasons of that where it feels like an obligation and then it's not, and then you're inspired. And so it's just kind of, it can be a back and forth type
Mhm.
thing, and that's okay.
Right. And when we think about obligation, one of the things I also thought about is motivation. It's not an I word, but it's I think a lot of times you do things even though you feel like you don't want to, you feel obligated, but there's a motivation to go there.
Yeah.
And Jesus, in that relationship with us, he provides that motivation. All he's done, all he's doing. I want to be motivated to be obligated to do
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. I mean, yeah. So as we're talking about this, it's so funny because I think that as we're talking about this seems so easy, right? Like, yeah. I mean, this seems so easy. Everybody should be doing this, but I am telling you, like, it is so easy to get caught in the routine of just, I go to church on Sunday. It's what I do, and then to really separate your spiritual life from your everyday life. To really separate, well, I have my relationship with God, and then I have my relationship with other people. And we're even in my men's group, Zoom group, in my men's Zoom group that we're meeting on Thursday mornings at 6:30 a.m., which is always great. But we're going through the book of Titus, and there's that problem in Titus about how what they believe does not show with how they're acting and how they're living. Like they're not the same thing. And so it's so easy to get in that routine of separating our faith with our life. And what discipleship is and does is it interlocks the two. It interlocks the relationship we have with others. And that's really what it is when you become a believer, loving God and loving others, it's integrated in together. Like it can't be separated. And it's a day-to-day lifelong journey. And so it's not just a Sunday morning, it's not just a Wednesday night, or whenever you decide to watch the service now on Facebook or YouTube, but it's much more bigger than that. And I think once we start to really think about that, that's when it gets like, okay, this is going to take some involvement and inspiration. This is going to take some intentionality. I mean, it's going to take these things because these things aren't going to come naturally in everyday life. Like you said, Lindsay, some seasons you're going to be all in, yes. In other seasons, you're just going to be, I got other stuff to focus on, and so you're going to have to be intentional and in some ways intense, right? On how we do that. So, any thoughts? Did that spark any thoughts?
I think it just brought it back to Bill's first 5 with the intense and the interactive. I mean, those to me are the things that as a discipler, those are tough because life is intense, life is messy, and you're going to be walking through some issues that are not always just clear cut. People have different experiences than you do. And so those are the issues where it's like, yeah, it sounds like, okay, if I just carve out some time, but it's very stretching and it's very interactive and it's intense. I like those 2 words. And that's kind of what your thoughts brought up. Just how intentional we have to be and knowing going in that it is going to get messy. Jesus's life was not this, picture of ease and comfort, right? And being a discipler is not a picture of comfort.
Yeah, for sure. Saying that, I was talking to some fellow students in my seminary class this last week, and the topic was, the topic was we read a little paper about how Christians have been attacked, right, for their beliefs, and how we in media we're portrayed a certain way, and we can't say certain things because it goes against what the culture is. And so, but then what we kind of talked about was, when it becomes to being persecuted, it's like, isn't this what we signed up for, though? Right? Christ was very clear, like, they're going to come after you just because you're connected to me. And so this is not going to be easy.
Right.
But I think all of us have stories of when you see relationships work, when you see somebody becoming a disciple, right? We've had baptisms, Bill. I mean, you've just had some in your backyard a few weeks ago, or maybe a month now. You see that, and that's what inspires it, because you're just like, man, in the middle of all this, God is changing lives. God is moving. I mean, there's going to be those big, huge things. There's going to be those small things that in your own personal relationships that God does. That again is that everyday journey of becoming more like Christ and then recreating that process. And so yeah. So I want to quickly move. It doesn't have to be quickly, but over the weeks to come. I know next week we're going to talk about how do I study the Bible. Like that may be a start. So if you're going to walk in God's word with somebody else, you probably need to make sure that you know how to read the Bible. What does that look like? How do I unpack scripture? So we're going to be talking about that. Like I said, sharing your faith. One of the things that we're going to say, which lead us into this next question, but over the next few weeks, we're going to look at the question, who are you discipling? Who are you discipling, and what does that look like? And so each week we kind of want to, as we close out, what are some intentional things that we can talk about that give people some kind of tangible ways to respond even this week when it comes to discipleship? And so I kind of want to jump into that as we kind of close our time together. So anybody offhand want to go first?
Well, I know we've touched on this earlier, but right now with everybody kind of trapped indoors and stuck together, really reaching out to your kids and giving them something to emulate. And so I guess I would just challenge people to see, what are you actually showing your kids? You have a captive audience. They're not being influenced by people from school, because you're probably not really influenced by anybody right now because there's nobody in school. And so you have this unique opportunity where your audience is fully captivated. They have nothing else to do, nowhere else to be except with you. And so I would just really challenge people to think about what they're doing and how your kids are observing you. So if, like for me, I know my struggle is my phone. And if that's all my kids see, what am I teaching them? Even if it was a Bible app or something, I'm still connected to technology 24/7, it feels like. And so instead of, if I'm even reading the Bible or listening to the Bible, instead of that, maybe I should actually be reading my Bible and showing them, hey, look I'm reading the Bible, or I'm reading this Bible study. And if they have questions, they can ask, hey, Dad, what are you reading? Oh, I'm just reading the Bible, or I'm reading this Bible study. Because they're pretty quizzical. They want to know, okay, well, what are you learning, or what is it about? And then I can explain it to them versus, well, the Dodgers aren't playing, so why are you checking out Clayton Kershaw? I'm like, I don't know, because I wanted to. So yeah, that'd be my challenge. Just your kids right now are a captive audience. They want to emulate you. They want to be just like you. So what are we showing them?
I would say, I mean, this is kind of maybe jumping ahead to the who are you discipling, but possibly identifying someone who's just a few steps behind, and just pray right now. Pray for that person, pray for you and your heart. If that's a leap to disciple, and if maybe you're not ready or you don't feel ready for that, I would even, if not everyone has children, we're all at different stages, and just read the Bible, study the best discipler, study Jesus, and study him as a discipler. So, maybe learning his motivations. I know Lance talked about in the sermon, compassion and empathy, and really looking at him as a discipler. And we can, when we put different spins on his care, on who he is, and that just sounded really bad. That's not what if we look at it a little different, we say, who is he as a discipler? What are his motivations? What is he trying to teach? And then trying to emulate that.
For sure. One of the things, and these are all great points. One of the things I thought about, I kind of look at I guess it's my tendency to look at discipleship more in a holistic sense. So just kind of everyday life. And so incorporating life into the process. So, so as I'm, building a coffee table and my son's helping me in that process, and through conversation, my son's going to pick up my beliefs, my values, my priorities, how I think, what my skills are, right? And so they'll pick that up. And so incorporating life into a discipleship relationship, I think, is so key. And so, yeah, we need to get together and we need to open up God's word and we need to pray, but also going, hey, there's an next door neighbor that needs their fence built. Can you help me with that?
Yes.
Spending hours just talking about life.
Yeah.
I've heard other people that have had the privilege of taking maybe like a family that's struggling and have them move into their home. And I've heard stories of how, yeah, we had this family, they're in our home, we're eating dinner, and then me and my wife got into an argument, and I made them watch us argue and reconcile because they need to know what healthy relationships look like, right? And I'm not saying do that. So don't hear me say that you need to grab some family and have them move in unless that's what God's calling you to do. But it's just that everyday life, right? Bill, I'm thinking about you spending time with your grandkids, right? Like as they see you live, they're going to pick up on how you think and what's valuable to you, right? So that's where I would say this week, whether it's your kids, your spouse, your next door neighbor, how can you get involved in life together at a safe distance, right? At a safe distance. But through that relationship, be able to share how God is growing you and share that with others. So.
Yeah, I think during our current circumstances, that whole idea of intentionality, I think takes on greater significance. And so it was easy before because I could just get together with the guys I meet with regularly, I disciple, them. But now that we're not getting together, I have to be very intentional about maintaining those relationships or even reaching out in different ways. And I'm finding that all the social media ways of doing that, and I think they fall short. And it's one thing to send a text to somebody, but I've been trying to revive the old school stuff is of writing letters or writing notes or even making the phone call, because it's just different when you hear that voice, when your presence is so important, I think, in times like these. So my discipling or my involvement with people, I've got to be more intentional in those ways. And it's so easy right now just to stay home and just take it easy or read a book, or do some intellectual pursuits. And I don't think there's anything wrong about thinking about the Dodgers myself. So I think it's okay. But I've got to be much more intentional about how I interact with people.
Yeah, for sure. Well, these are all great things. I don't know if you're watching this, maybe comment below. What are some things that you're doing personally, in regards to discipleship that could encourage others this week. And so again, man, we just thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it is a joy to get together each and every Wednesday night and to share a little bit of Gateway DNA and culture. But I think this takes it to a whole nother level when we talk about discipleship, because it is really the heart of God, right? It's what He's called us all to do. We are all called to be disciple makers. So I really want to encourage you, think about this. Like Lindsay said, pray about this. Pray about people in your life that, like said, are a couple of steps behind you that you can reach back and help them through that process, help them grow in their faith. Also thinking about how can I grow personally, and being intentional about asking somebody else, like, hey, I'd love for you to disciple me, or whatever it takes, is to be in those intentional relationships. And so we hope tonight you're encouraged. I've always, we've tried to add some kind of humor to this with goofy stories. But I thought, you know what? I really feel like this is so important that I really just want to focus on discipleship. And so maybe we'll have another time to get together and just share stories that are funny. I know all of us, but anyways, hey Gateway, we appreciate you. I don't know if anybody has any final thoughts before we close up tonight.
Nope. Keep at it. Keep the faith.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Cool. Well, we appreciate you, Bill, Seth, and Lindsay. We appreciate you and your family. We even appreciate Judy for making a guest appearance. And so that's awesome. And so, hey, if you have any questions about discipleship, if you want to get connected, if you're thinking about, you know what, I need somebody in my life that I need to walk with, let us know. Let us know. Email us. Call the church. We will get you in connection with those people that can disciple. And so we really want to encourage you to do that. Again, we're going to be talking about this a lot more. And so be looking for that as the weeks to come. Hey, Gateway, we love you so much. We miss you so much. We are praying for you. We are praying for your families. And thank you once again for joining us tonight on Gateway Midweek. Have a blessed rest of the week, and we will see you again real soon. God bless.
Bye.